Thank you all for coming. My name is Benjamin O'Connor and I'm a director at New London Architecture. I know most of you are familiar with what we do, but for those of you less familiar with NLA, we are an independent membership organisation with over 600 business members across the built environment. We also have international and individual members. Our purpose is to bring people together to shape a better city. We do this in London, but increasingly both nationally and internationally. We have a year-round programme of research, exhibitions, workshops and talks that bring professionals from across the public and private sector together to share knowledge, present plans, make connections and provide a forum for debate. As some of you will know, we've been planning for some time to put together a programme that supports diversity across the industry, and we thought that now would be an excellent time to bring together a number of organisations who are tackling this issue already and ask how we can support this work. Today, I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourself and the organisations that you represent, tell us a bit about the work that you've been doing and any future plans you may have. If you have had any initial thoughts on ways that NLA could support you or tackle this issue in general, then please feel free to bring this up at the end of your introduction. I'll be taking notes throughout, and once we've heard from everyone, I will summarise any of the key points for discussion and posit some actions based both on your suggestions and on our own internal discussions on our approach. We have had a number of thoughts and ideas that we'd like to share with you for any feedback. We've got an hour and a half scheduled for today. I know that Charlotte has to leave at 10:30. If anyone else does have to leave, if you just message me on the chat and I'll sort of bring you further up the agenda. If we finish early, then great, but I promise we're not going to go past 11 o'clock, so 11 will be the latest. Let me just click off that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually come to each of you in sort of alphabetical order by surname. There'll be a bit of switching around as a couple of people might not have to leave earlier. So we are going to start, hold on a second. Just pulling up my agenda. Okay, we're going to start with Bola. If we could come to you, Chairman of Diverse City Surveyors. Is Bola here? I don't think Bola's here. Okay, forget that. When we're all waiting for Bola. Charlotte, we're going to come to you first. I know you have to leave earlier, and we've also got Gabrielle from Women in Planning as well. So Charlotte, should we come to you first?
Yeah, thank you. I work for the London Borough of Waltham Forest as a principal policy planner, but outside of work 8 years ago, I set up an organisation called Women in Planning, and Gabrielle will speak a bit more to what the actual London branch are doing. But we now have 14 branches across the UK. We've led research on women and leadership, which has actually led me to do a PhD on women, leadership and planning, which I've just started this year, and looking at what particular barriers there are for women within my profession. We also used to run a series called Proud of Women, which started to highlight careers in planning, and we've sort of carried that on through other work which Gabby will run through. And then we've really been working with the industry. So we do quite a lot with CJ, actually. We are a partner with Priya, and we were an advisor on the RTPI's change strategy. I think when we first met before, I think there is something that the NLA could do on sort of unconscious bias. I do think that that's something that the industry needs to tackle. And then just about other things we've been doing. So over lockdown, we've held 21 events. So we've cooled down a little bit now, a little bit exhausting. And we'll soon be launching a sort of Instagram video sort of knowledge exchange thing, which I'm not actually doing anything on, and it's all being done by some of the other national chairs, but it's really going to have videos of all different women working around planning and sharing their sort of professional thoughts on different topical issues.
Amazing. Great, thank you, Charlotte. Is it Gabby or Gabrielle?
Gabrielle's fine. Hi, everyone. So I'm Gabrielle and I work at Soundings, which is a community engagement consultancy. And in the work that I do every day, it's kind of advocating for local communities having a say in new developments in their area. And obviously bringing diverse communities together, and that is part of that. But as Charlotte said, I'm on the Women in Planning Committee in London. And so in representing them, we started out thinking about women's careers and championing women in the planning industry, and now there's more of a focus on women being on panels and debating topical discussions in the industry. And one of our most successful events was from start to completion at London City Hall with over 100 guests, where we had women talking about planning through the ages and their experiences in that. And we also do a day in the life of series where it's kind of like, oh, what's the magazine called, Charlotte? Do you remember? the
Stylist at the back.
Yeah, so it's kind of like leading female planners and women in the planning industry give their kind of day in the life of, and it's just kind of, you see what you can be kind of situation. And then I've also been part of organising 2 events, one with Argent about the all-female team for Coal Drops Yard, and also how to make remote engagement more inclusive during the COVID times where everything's going digital.
Sorry, I muted myself. I've got some construction works going on right next to me, which is really convenient. Sorry about that. Great, thank you very much, Gabrielle. We're going to come to you, Bola, now. I think you might have missed the intro. We're just asking everyone to do a bit of an introduction to yourself, the organisations you are running, and also if there's any thoughts you might have had on ways that NLA can support the work that you're doing, or any insights into things you think we should be doing.
Okay, so morning everyone. Apologies for technical challenges on the access. So I'm Bola Abisogun, OBE. I'm the founder and chairman of Diversity Surveyors and Chartered Quantity Surveyor for my sins. Happy to be on the call and appreciate the invite, Benjamin. I think the conversation matter is quite obvious. You know, diverse leaders, we're talking about diversity and inclusion. My particular organization, founded in 2006, has evolved into, as of 2017, the RICS BAME network. And we're pretty much the authority on the BAME lived experience as a surveyor. And we've gone into that niche because for 152 years now, it's been a challenging existence for many men and women in that profession. And we've just failed miserably to tease the conversation. We have a growing global footprint of over 1,500 members now. And essentially we offer everything from early careers advice, pretty much on the representation piece, to pre and post APC career development. So most of our members are aspiring to become chartered surveyors. We're also working with the Chartered Institute Building as well, because it's not necessarily just an RSS thing, it's a black surveyor thing or a BAME surveyor thing. More generically. So that's pretty much what we do. I do lots of other things. I work extensively with the Mayor of London and young black men in particular on an initiative called Movement Up. And with that particular initiative, we are trying to get young people, in particular young black men, to consider roles in the built environment, which in itself is a conversation that is very scary for many. It's pushed under the carpet for others, and it's completely undermined and disrespected by several people that have come into contact with the ask about why you don't want to engage with that particular cohort. So my attraction around this conversation was just to hear what others are doing respectively and what we can do collectively, because I'm not a fan of working on independence. I think the strength in numbers, collaboration is my middle name, and I'm not afraid to speak frankly about what essentially has dogged my own career now 26, 27 years in the making. So I think we have a website, diversitysurveyors.com. You can take a look. Feel free to engage. And I really just want to, hand it back to yourselves and just, soak in the conversation. So thanks for the invite.
Great, thank you, Bola. You picked up on a few things. Actually, all three of you so far have picked up on things that I think will lead to a really interesting discussion around things that we can do as NLA. And just to reiterate something I didn't really say in the beginning, this is very much about what we can do together as a group. This is not an NLA PR exercise. It's something, my organization I've been trying to push for the last 5 years. All of a sudden, it has obviously come way up the agenda and people are listening, which is good. There's a really unique opportunity, but I think there's some interesting things you've all said so far that we can work on together. I'm going to come to Sue now. Sue is Managing Director at Real Estate Balance.
Hello, and hello, quite a lot of people I know on this call before I became Managing Director of Real Estate Balance. I've known David for more years than I'm actually going to admit to. I've known Charlotte for quite a long time. I think I'm spending more time on phone calls with Amos at the moment than you can shake a stick at. Amos, hello for the 4th time in as many days, and I've been speaking to Bola as well. So I've been Manager Director of Real Estate Balance since the 1st of April. I don't recommend anyone starting a new job in lockdown, but there you go. And prior to that, I was in comms consultancy, and immediately prior to joining here, joining Real Estate Balance, I was at London First. And I know, I was on the phone to Nick yesterday. I know all of you are what I still call Pipers in NLA very well, because I've worked with you all on MIPIM for the last 98,000 years. And when I say 98,000 years, I mean 98,000 years, ever since it started. So Real Estate Balance was set up 5 years ago. Sam McClary and I, Sam is the editor of EG, and I set up Rewire in September 2015, and Real Estate Balance set up about a month or 2 later. So they've been going for about 5 years. They've been going 5 years this autumn. It's Real Estate Balance up to now has been very, very, very focused on gender balance. We subscribe, or we support the Hampton Alexander target to see women represent 33% of senior leadership positions in real estate by 2020, and ultimately to seek 50% representation. I'm not sure we're going to get that this year, but that's what we're looking for. Where we've been very, very successful, I think, is in getting support from CEOs. We've got about between 80 and 85 corporate members. And if you become a member of Real Estate Balance, your Chief Executive Officer has to sign what we call 10 CEO commitments for diversity. And, you can't become a member unless you sign those. So it means that we've got, all the big boys are in. So British Land, Landsec, SEGRO, the big agents, all of them are signed up, and that means all their chief execs are signed up. So I think that's where we've been particularly successful. We've recently set up a Next Gen committee with representatives of JLL and SEGRO again, and VTS, who are a prop tech company, and Knight Frank, and Capco, and one other, Avison Young. And so our next sort of big hit is on making sure we're hitting middle managers as well. So that's what we do. I could go through everything in terms of, why has gender balance become business critical, but you probably all know that. We do a whole series of things. We're just going to be starting our 3rd survey. We've done a survey every 2 years. And the last one of those was done in 2019. It's a survey done by Grosvenor. PwC sort of write that up, and I've got slides here which I can let people have. Bola and Amos have both heard these before anyway, because we've all been on the same calls in the last few days. That was fast tracking gender balance across real estate in 2019. I've talked about the CEO stuff. We also have a real estate balance toolkit on our website, which you can go into and look at some practical things. And basically I've taken over, and I've been very clear that although clearly it's not as if we've got gender balance right, but I'm very aware, when I came into Real Estate Balance, I was very strong on making sure that we also looked at race and ethnicity, and we also looked at social background. And the race and ethnicity thing, if I say that's been easier to do, that sounds absolutely dreadful, but clearly we're living in particular times, which are, just means that everyone, I think, is looking at that. So whereas I thought I was going to have a bit of a fight on my hands at Real Estate Balance, I've got no such thing. And Amos and Bola will both tell you that, and say Amos was in on a call with us on Monday, and everyone's just delighted for that, and we're going to be doing lots of work with Amos and hopefully with Bola. And that's it in about as quickly as I can do it, and that's speaking very fast, so apologies, it's very fast. If anyone else needs to know anything, they can just ask me.
Thank you very much, Sue. Tom, I'm going to come to you now. Tom at LGBTQ+ architecture?
Architecture LGBT+.
There you go.
Same thing. Hi, everyone. So I'm an architect, but in 2005, I started National Student Pride when I was at university. which is an annual weekend festival for students from all over the UK. It's still going now, and our event centres around our main stage panels, tackling topical issues, and we host the UK's largest diversity careers fair. So off the back of that, in 2016, I started Architecture LGBT+, and we did a Pride breakfast with a Q&A chaired by the BBC's Evan Davis, and we put it on at the RBA, which is on the Portland Place, which is the start of the Pride in London parade route. The first event we did, the majority of our 200 attendees were white men. So something we tried quite hard since then to turn around. Our committee, we always have at least 50% women. And we now make sure all of our panelists are 50% women and have BME representation. Our Pride celebrations are now a joint partnership with the LFA and the RBA, and in 2018 we launched a Pride float competition with the LFA, and then had our first float in the parade 2 years ago. Slowly spreading around the UK, we launched last year in Manchester, Brighton and the North East, and we were about to launch in Edinburgh in May until lockdown hit. Our funding comes from architecture practices, and many of those have now started their own internal networks, which we've helped to build. So we're trying to tackle a lot of architecture practices are small and medium sized and don't have stuff in place. So we've also got quite a few smaller practices that are sponsoring us and starting to turn around their own diversity. We've concentrated on intersectionality in recent years with panel discussions chaired by Dana Walker from Built by Us. And on Tuesday next week, which is the last day of Pride Month, we're building on this with an online conversation on racism between Kachenga, who's a Black trans woman, and Ben Hunt, the BBC's LGBT correspondent.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. We're going to come to Sarah now. Sarah from founder of Land Collective.
Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Sarah, and I run the Land Collective, which is a content-led platform. We basically aim to educate and engage more young people, predominantly from the ages of 18 to 25, with the property market and the built environment. So it was essentially started by myself 3 years ago when I was at university as a kind of commercial awareness tool. It kind of features lots of opinion articles about what's going on in the property market and built environment at the moment, and we kind of have quite a holistic viewpoint. So we cover everything on our blog, from architecture to design to commercial property, residential property, sustainability, and more kind of general topics like diversity and inclusion. We were getting into the realm of events as well at the beginning of the year. So we hosted our first ever event in collaboration with GradFeed, and it was essentially a careers networking event where we had kind of half student and half kind of young professionals within the industry. It was a really good turnout, and we were planning on doing more of those events throughout the year, but unfortunately COVID hit, so events are kind of on pause at the moment. But further to this, our current team ranges from myself and 9 editors who are based both in the UK and outside the UK, over in the US and in Asia as well. And I'd say our kind of diverse mix is quite good. Most of our editorial team are women, and a lot of our editorial team are from an ethnic background, which is very positive. Later on in the year, subject to COVID restrictions and that kind of thing, we are hoping to delve more into events again, and more specifically into lower income areas, starting off in London because that's just where I'm based. And we hope to go to more schools and colleges this time around as opposed to universities, and try and educate more young people about the sheer amount of career choice within the sector. I've always kind of been championing this sector. I always think that is one that's very exciting and very dynamic, and I would like to see more faces like mine, and I would like to see more women in the future entering the sector. So that is one thing that we're going to be working on quite tirelessly in the next kind of few months, and it would be great to have everyone on board with that as well.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm going to come to Ellie now in the regeneration team at GLA.
Hi, thanks. So I work at London City Hall, I work in regeneration. And in a nutshell, the principle that really underpins our work on diversity is that London's built environment sector should represent the city it serves. Sounds obvious, but unfortunately isn't the case. So we know that the built environment sector is really thriving in London, but despite that, we all know that women and minority groups are still underrepresented. In architecture and engineering, only 16% of jobs in London are held from people by people from Black and minority ethnic groups, despite 43% of Londoners being from BAME backgrounds, and that really needs to change. History has taught us that progress is by no means inevitable. Diversity and equality can't just be expected to happen on its own, and the action that we take needs to be really specific, it needs to be measurable. So about a year ago exactly, I think, we launched the Mayor's Supporting Diversity Handbook with the help of the Mayor's design advocates and with the help of actually a couple of people on this call. For the handbook, we crowdsourced almost 50 research pieces on the barriers to equality, diversity and inclusion within the sector. And the handbook then provides a resource for proactive measures that can be taken by anyone involved in shaping the built environment. Since we launched that handbook, we've made some progress. So the RIBA have now included EDI as part of their core CPD programme. We've been engaging with smaller practices to look at how they might pool resources to enable best practice across recruitment and HR. We're in conversation with advocate organisations about creating a digital platform for open source policy sharing to make that easier for smaller practices. We're reviewing our own procurement policy to revise the diversity and inclusion requirements in the tender process. And we're now supporting Paradigm Network to create a digital directory for BAME-led practices to serve as a resource for people commissioning architectural and design services. And I think it's important to say that within that, we will hopefully be differentiating between BAME-led practices and Black-led practices, because I think there's a danger that everybody can fall under the umbrella of BAME, and actually there are different barriers experienced by different groups. We've also convened a working group with heads of professional institutes across the sector. So that includes RIBA, RTPI, RICS, the Landscape Institute, Institute of Chartered Engineers and the Royal Academy of Engineering. And we're identifying together areas where we can take action collaboratively. So for example, we're looking at getting consistent data on diversity across the whole sector. Recent kind of protests against racial inequalities in the US and the UK have brought a really sharp focus to our work. And we know that there clearly needs to be quite an immediate change in behaviours, including really being alive to issues like unconscious bias, which was mentioned earlier, gaslighting and other forms of discrimination, and calling them out. And an example that I'd just like to give in terms of unconscious bias and how that can really have an effect is that we've recently seen Southwark Council launch its architectural services framework. The framework includes 110 practices, only 7 of which are BAME-led and none of which are Black-led, and that is just not acceptable. We know that this it's not likely to be an issue of there being direct action taken against that panel being diverse. But if there aren't targets set and there isn't clarity to what we're trying to achieve, we won't see any progress. I think the NLA could really help here by engaging public and private sector partners who are clients in conversations around procurement. It would be really great. I mean, NLA is already leading the way in a lot of senses, but I think there could be a real call for allyship among your members and supporters, but being really careful about not giving people the opportunity to be tokenistic. So if people are signing up to a social media campaign, that is not progress in and of itself. That's a commitment to looking at practices, doing the work, and importantly, measuring the impact. My hope is that EDI becomes part of business as usual across all of our activities, and that it's not a theme in itself. the EDI principles should underpin everything, every meeting, every event, every conference, you know, huge conferences like LREF. And I guess my final point is that we shouldn't be expecting Black and brown people to shoulder the whole burden of addressing racial inequality, because essentially the problem isn't theirs.
Thank you very much, Ellie. A lot to unpack there, but really, really interesting insights, and some suggestions and thoughts I've had, and we at NLA team have had. I think we'll cover some of those issues, so we'll get to that in the discussion. Thank you. I'm going to come to Nikki now from Public Practice.
Hi, morning everyone. So I help run an organisation. We're about 3 years old. We're called Public Practice, and I guess we're kind of more of a recruitment agent. We try not to say those words, but that's what we are. Our mission is to place a more diverse profession into public planning. So that's predominantly, we run a year-long placement programme, and underpinning that is around trying to diversify the public planning profession. I think perhaps what's slightly different to Public Practice to the rest of the really inspiring organisations on this morning's call is that when we say diversity, I think we also mean professional diversity and rethinking what actually makes a planner, and breaking down some of those sort of professional kind of accreditation barriers and opening up that kind of sector to a whole realm of people. So I think when I look at running our recruitment program, we're trying to break down the way we recruit to ensure that we're opening up to like a broader social demographic, to disabilities, to sexual diversity, to ethnicity, but also to lived diversity and neurodiversity. So I think we're trying to, it's more about a universal diversity in our recruitment program. We're doing okay with our recruitment. I try and put in some good practices, but there's definitely more I'm trying to push. Something I'm looking at the moment is around accessibility of our own sort of organisational guidance. Speaking with the team yesterday about making sure we have closed captions on all of our events, to using the alt text on all of our images, you know, simple things like that. So that's something I've been doing like last week. Looking more broadly, I was thinking last night around, for Public Practice, I think there's 2 things. There's one about getting people into profession. So maybe there's outreach earlier on, further upstream. We've got a event next week with some of our associates presenting some of their work around, they developed a toolkit for school kids, trying to encourage them to get into engaging them in planning. So I really think there's something that we could do perhaps collectively about outreach in schools and what that might look like in lots of different ways. So I think that's one area. The other thing that's popped up before is work experience in work. So whether that's whistleblowing or culture, that's something that our associates are flagging a little bit during their placements in their authorities. Is there's one thing getting more diverse people into a job, but then what's the support? How do you support them develop? So picking up, I guess, on some of the things that perhaps Charlotte mentioned about leadership training, and perhaps that whistleblowing mechanism, and whether that's training HR and colleagues in there about what's acceptable and what's not, because I think some people just don't know anymore. And I think perhaps a conversation around that would be really helpful. I know there's a lot of people that if they got told a little bit, or they're better educated, they would be happily conform to it a bit more. The other thing I've been looking at is trying to change the campaigning that Public Practice are doing around diversity. So it's not about a kind of making sure we're not being tokenism, and actually trying to describe why having a diverse profession is really great for planning and the positives and why it's really important. So trying to sort of change the narrative about it not being a kind of requirement metric that you've got to meet, but why having a disabled planner in a local authority is actually a really, really great thing. And I think that's something that maybe we could do collectively as a really great sort of campaign or something, perhaps, about why having a diverse profession is good for everyone. But we're only a small team of 5 at the moment, so these are all just lovely ideas I've got in my head, but haven't really pushed them forward much yet. But it'd be great to do, yeah, lots of sort of things like that.
Thank you, Nikki. I think, yeah, that's very much the purpose of this call, is we do have a bigger team. We've got, as I say, the whole network. I think there's a real opportunity to work on some of these things and find funding for them and all of that sort of stuff. So thank you. David, we'll come to you now. David's from Freehold.
Great, thank you, Ben. Morning, everyone. Thanks for asking us to take part. Yeah, I'm David Mann. I'm a building surveyor, partner at TFT. I founded Freehold by accident, really, by a chance meeting on Clapham High Street in a gay bar in 2011, when I bumped into my co-chair, Salim, who I knew was a lawyer, but I didn't know was gay, and we sort of said how ridiculous this was and how frustrating it was that virtually the entire industry was in the closet and there was no really visible role models. So as a result of that, we had a meeting, and we were amazed by just how many people literally came out of the woodwork and joined us. And like Sue, we found the industry really supportive, and I wasn't sure in reality whether I was going to get struck off by the RICS when we started. That was kind of how we were sort of diving into the unknown at that time. So it was lovely to have the RICS hosting one of our first events. Jump 9 years later, we're now up to 1,300 members. We're a free to join individual membership group. We've avoided monetization, really, to keep things simple, but we do have some sponsorship to support us in administration from British Land, Landsec, Shaftesbury, and our own board host companies. We hold networking events every 2 months, which are funded by the host company. We have a mentoring scheme, which has helped over 80 people, either in their personal development or their business development, and many of the mentees are now mentors, which is really nice to see. We also have a link up with Lionheart, the RICS Benevolent Fund, that if they have an LGBT related person with an issue that contacts their helpline, then they can be referred to us. We also support a number of LGBT charities and industry charities. We have a charity represented at each event. We have a thought leadership program, which has covered things like gay parenting and trans awareness and mental health. We also have a theatre program and panto program. We are gay after all, which we run jointly with Chris and Simon at Planning Out. We work with the Property Press, RICS, BPF, Revo, really lobbying them and gaining their support just to highlight LGBT issues. We have an employer engagement program to encourage them to set up, and we support them in setting up internal networks. We've also found ourselves a bit of a bridge, really, either with students who tend to very often go back into the closet when they enter their first job, or people jumping from one employer to another, going back into the closet. We have members who are probably in most organisations, and therefore we can, with both parties consent, we can introduce them to each other, so at least they have a friendly face when they either change or enter their first employment. We're a big feeder for Stonewall membership, and a lot of property companies are desperately trying to get into the top 100 employer index. We've been a catalyst for several other LGBT groups and internal property networks as people meet people at Freehold events. We also march in Pride under the banner of changing the face of property, and jointly with Planning Out similarly. We unfortunately represent the industry, so most of our members look like me, so we do run women's events to try and encourage our women's membership, and also we were going to support Black Pride this year, albeit that's had to go online, so I hope to do that slightly stronger next year. Next week we're supporting Pride in Property, which is a programme organised by Changing the Face of Property, which has Some CEOs hosted coffee mornings, the history of Pride, how to be an LGBT ally, and also protecting LGBT venues post-lockdown. If perhaps, Ben, I could send you a link to that. They're all free online events, but it'd be great to have some of you looking at some of those. I think our biggest achievement is almost accidental, really, which was a collective confidence we've all found, which has enabled many people, including myself, to come out within their organisations and become role models and help to change their own work environment and the work environment for others. As a slight aside, there's a bit of social history actually, which I don't think is particularly well known, but the Black Panther Party and the Gay Liberation Movement actually worked together in 1969 and 1970, so that's the 50th anniversary. That mainly because they were both having the shit kicked out of them by the police and got fed up with it. So I thought that was quite a nice analogy for what Ben's doing today.
Great, thank you very much, David. And just on your point around resources, if anyone has anything, links, research papers, anything like that they would like to share with this group, send it on to me and we'll put together a pack after this meeting alongside the notes. I think it's a really good thing to share, so thanks for bringing that, David. We're going to come... Sorry, I muted myself. We're going to go next, co-founder of Urban, CJ.
Hi, Ben. Morning, everyone. I've had one or two slightly logistic issues this morning, but I'm glad to be on the call, glad to be part of the discussion. So really to kick things off, thank you, Ben, for obviously arranging this. We've been talking about getting the groups together for a while, so it's great to actually finally do so. What do we represent as a platform? So effectively, we are trying to attract younger people from underprivileged backgrounds into the built environment. Our goals are twofold, not just to attract the next crop of talent, but also to empower those that are currently working in the industry already by giving them a platform to be recognised. So we do this through various forms of content. That includes short video documentaries, interviews, news articles. Now, I must say, I graduated as an urban planner from UCL 10 years ago, which feels like a very long time now, but I'm not working as a professional in the industry. So I'm not a qualified surveyor, not a qualified planner, not an architect. What I can represent are the people who are interested in the industry, but aren't necessarily working in it, don't have the badges, and don't have the letters at the end of their name. So we've seen in recent times that the industry, not just ours, but others as well, is seriously problematic in terms of trying to attract Black people and trying to enable Black people to thrive. And I think this is something that has to change. It's gone on for far too long, especially in the property and built environment. And my purpose behind this platform is to bring about that change. That's what underpins the whole thing. We've been quite fortunate to work with some inspiring professionals across the board, so that includes the likes of Charlotte Warfare, Gabby's on the call as well, Priya as well for Baby Property, and also Kira for BFA. So we've actually had one or two dealings with a few of you already. If we haven't, don't be offended, there's still plenty of capacity for interviews to come. I would say that we are urbanists representing other urbanists. So when we say urbanist, we take that to mean anyone that's got an interest in the city or some sort of social connection or passion for social change. And what we've been doing recently, which has been fantastic, is that we're trying to promote young people, not just people who are working in the industry, but we're trying to give people a leg up. So as an example, we've recently set up interviews for students and graduates to actually go out and have conversations with hiring managers and line directors and senior people, so they've got that first contact with prospective employers, which they wouldn't ordinarily get, especially not in this current climate. So I'd say overall, there's 3 different layers. I'd say at least there's 2 to start with. There's 2 different layers that underpin this platform. We've got the young people coming through who are trying to give a leg into the industry, give a leg up. But we're doing this by exposing them and giving them a platform to write articles and obviously give them a means to be recognised. But we're also empowering those who are in the industry already as professionals who maybe in normal circumstances haven't necessarily had the exposure, or people aren't aware of the fantastic things that they're doing. So those are the two real layers at the moment. And I think in the future, there's definitely prospects and there's potential for it to evolve even further. That's pretty much it from myself.
Thank you, CJ. We're going to come to Chris now from Planning Out. Chris, over to you.
Hi there. So I'm Chris. I'm the co-chair of Planning Out. We work very closely with David Mann, who just gave an introduction to Freehold. And basically, we're very aware that in the planning sector, a lot of professionals aren't out and are not comfortable being out. And we sought to change that. And I've been very lucky for the company I work with, BECG. We've got an out gay chief executive, and we've got a number of gay board members. And I just really contrasted my experiences at BECG with a really diverse gay leadership team to some of my previous jobs, and the difference was just massive. So I feel really inspired to work with Planning Out. We've got a team of 5 members. We've got a planning lawyer, we've got an architect, we've got a local authority planner, and basically we just set up a whole series of network events. We encourage all kinds of LGBT built environment professionals to come together, swap business cards. I think one of the proudest things about Planning Out is the way it encourages business-to-business networking. For example, I've got some architects on board, which I've given some work to. They've given me some work in turn. We make referrals. And it really just kind of spreads this kind of LGBT positive influence across the industry. We've done some events with the NLA at the Building Centre, and they've been really fantastic, using that great exhibition space. And we'd love to do more of those. And another thing about Planning Out is we're really hot on research. So we've got quite a few academics as part of our members, and they work for the UCL Urban Lab. And we've commissioned them to do some research on how we can protect our LGBT spaces, such as the venues in Clapham and Vauxhall. What do we do post-COVID to ensure that they're going to thrive? Because I think having those safe spaces where LGBT members of the community can come together and just be themselves is really vital. I'm also going to give a shout out to Pride in Property, which is something that Freehold and Planning Out and Building Equality are working together on. Because obviously Pride was cancelled this year, and we normally all march together as kind of built environment professionals, but instead we're going to be doing a series of online events. So I'll be sending out some emails about that shortly.
Thanks very much, Chris. Just on the sort of venue piece, I think it's worth saying we're about to do a couple of events. One's around sort of sports venues. We're also looking at live music venues. I think there's a conversation to be had around the LGBT venue piece as well. Okay, next I'm going to come to Priya, founder of BAME Property. Priya.
Hi, hi everyone. Priya, founder of BAME Property, which is an organisation to help promote more ethnic diversity in the built environment sector. I started about 2.5 years ago. This is during my time when I was at BECG with Chris. So I'm sure he'll remember when I was pitching my idea to our, to my former CEO, and I said, I think we really need an ethnic diversity group in the property and planning sectors, because in the run up to that, there was a number of things which resulted in me creating BAME Property. And it ranged from going to usual networking events, not seeing that much diversity on the panels or with the attendees, looking within my own company or within the company that I used to work at, and within my kind of project client base as well, there wasn't that much ethnic diversity. And I think working in predominantly London and on London sites and going into some of the most diverse communities all across London, it was quite shocking to see that sometimes members of our of my team that I was working in just didn't understand the people on the ground. And I think if you want to be able to do good community consultation, which is what my day job is, then you do absolutely need to understand the people that you're working with. And this is something that Gabrielle also echoed as well. So I completely agree with that. And then after a few more incidents of just seeing planning policy go wrong because ethnic minds weren't considered, being called an Indian princess by one of my former clients wasn't great either, led to me creating BAME in property. And I've got to give thanks to CJ, who helped me in the early days of BAME in property. One of our first sponsors was Osborne Richardson, along with BECG, for the launch event, which was held at the Building Centre. And this was in March 2018. And since then, BAME in property has just really taken off. So since then, there's been a further 6 events in central London with the likes of Knight Frank twice, Cushman and Wakefield. We held a parliamentary reception with them last year. Landsec, Savills, we did an event with K&L Gates. So there's been a broad array of companies in the property industry sponsoring BAME in property. But I would also say that BAME property, which I'm sure many of you have noticed, has got a very big social media presence. So we're everywhere. One of the things that I learned very early on in my PR career was COPE. So create once, publish everywhere. You'll often see the same thing said differently on multiple platforms. And I owe a lot of the success of BAME property to its social media growth. So we're everywhere. And I suppose the kind of purpose of BAME property is firstly to acknowledge that there isn't that much ethnic diversity in the property and planning sectors. So across the UK, we've got about 14% ethnic minority population. However, the last survey, which was taken across the built environment sector, which was by the RICS and EY, I think it was, showed that there was only 1.2% of ethnic minority built environment professionals, which is ridiculous given how much diversity there is. Now in London, we've got nearly 45% ethnic minority professionals, but still we don't really match that. So you would assume that the average of ethnic minority professionals in the built environment sector would generally be higher in London, but that isn't necessarily the case. And what I found through the multiple conversations that I've had with ethnic minority people who are in the industry and those who are looking is that you get quite a lot of diversity at the graduate and the entry level. And this is something that I'm sure we find across gender balance, lots of other diversity kind of identities as well. However, you get to the middle management point and that's where it starts to stumble. So you look at associate directors, you look at executive leadership boards, and there just isn't that much ethnic diversity, if any. I think some companies are very guilty of not having any ethnic diversity amongst their leadership board. And this is where I have to pick a bone with those companies who released their blackout image a few weeks ago. They released public statements because of the Black Lives Matter cause. And personally, it was quite hypocritical to see all of this, because these are the very same companies who I've approached over the last few years saying, would you like to have a conversation about ethnic diversity? Would you like to talk about your Black employees and how they might be experiencing discrimination and so on? Always quiet, and all of a sudden jumping on the bandwagon, dare I say, having this blackout image. But if you look at their executive leadership boards, they're probably white, male and stale, and some of them actually are. So for me, this is really about creating tangible changes. This is really about creating long-lasting changes. And I've always said that D&I has to be a core part of a company strategy. It shouldn't be an add-on. It shouldn't be a PR stunt, and it shouldn't be something that you just jump on because of unfortunate events that are happening across the Atlantic. So, I've recently had a surge in inquiries from companies who want to start making ethnic diversity a priority within their companies, asking me to write them, strategies and saying, would you be able to help us with our ethnic diversity? I do have a full-time job. I'm not here to write strategies for companies. You would hire consultants to do this for you. However, the kind of future of BAME property is to hopefully evolve into some sort of consultancy service where I can give this advice and hopefully help companies in that way. But it's not necessarily welcome for companies to just suddenly jump on the bandwagon but not necessarily know how to go about it. And I think that certainly needs to be conveyed to the industry, is that if you are going to be making diversity and inclusion changes within your company, make sure it's part of your company strategy, because when it comes to your annual company reports, there will actually be a section about it where you can hold people to account, actually, you know, measure targets and so on. But if it's just something that you think you need to do, you know, a lot of companies are asking, can we hold an event with you? Can you come in and speak to our company? Well, then what? You know, I don't think that's really the solution. You really have to think about how you want to make these D&I changes, particularly for ethnic minority colleagues who are experiencing perhaps more you know, discrimination than others, and Black colleagues in particular. And now to move away from the negativity of that, something which has been quite positive, or rather the silver lining of COVID lockdown, is I launched a virtual event series throughout lockdown. So I've hosted a few events, also spoken on a few events as well. And this has been good because usually people who attend BAME property events are based in London, because they've only ever been held in London. I was supposed to be doing a Birmingham launch in May, actually, with Eversheds law firm, and that was going to be the kind of flagship event of the year, you know, starting to create that regional base, you know, such as some of the other diversity groups out there, and I was really looking forward to that. However, because that wasn't possible, I transferred events online, and a few people here were part of the events. So Charlotte, I know you joined one of BAME Property's first online events, which was a roundtable talking about COVID-19 and the impact of ethnicity on this. So looking at things like intergenerational living, looking at the role of the ethnic retailer when it came to hoarding and things like that. And I think what we found was this was a really interesting roundtable. We had some really interesting conversations and discussions coming out of it. And then since then, I've hosted events with a number of partners. So I partnered with a think tank called Bridge India, which enabled us to hold an event about lockdown in India, which was something different, something which appealed to members outside of the usual BAME property base. It enabled to have that kind of cross-culture, cross-country spectrum as well. So we talked about housing in India and how that is completely detrimental to a lockdown policy, because in order to be in lockdown you need to have a home, but unfortunately millions of Indians don't actually have a home. They live in slums, they live on the streets. So that was a really interesting conversation to have that different perspective. But funnily enough, quite a lot of the issues which came out of this lockdown in India event we found affect quite a lot the diaspora Indian communities in the UK as well. So it was nice to be able to draw that comparison. And the last event that I hosted last month was looking at the impact of COVID-19 on BAME mental health. So this was just before Mental Health Awareness Week. And this was a good opportunity to talk about, you know, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on BAME communities. I don't think any of us have missed the reports in the news about it. And there are so many reasons for this. And this I mainly partnered with this organization called the Centric Lab, which I'm sure a few of you have heard of, but they're fantastic. They do really excellent research. And they recently published a paper about communities in London and the impact of COVID-19. So having more exposure to pollution, for example, being more exposed to COVID-19 in certain jobs, especially if they're quite manual labor. So, you know, sometimes hereditary conditions. So if you're from certain communities, Black or Asian communities, you have underlying health conditions which increase your susceptibility of contracting COVID-19. So again, that created a really interesting discussion about you know, how mental health could be exacerbated amongst BAME communities. And then other than that, I've just been working with BAME property partners. So I've partnered quite a bit with London Property Alliance, with some of their recent research, which was about the future of skills in the industry, which I think we can all agree needs to go beyond surveying and, you know, the usual kind of property routes, but actually starting to look at social sciences. And I know something that CJ does with Urbanist Platform is getting, you know, people to write really interesting commentary about what's going on in, you know, cities and urban environments. And I think that is really important to have that critical thinking to be able to, you know, future-proof our industry. Have also been working with British Property Federation and a few others as well. I can't remember the name, Building People. We had a meeting with BOLA, and BPIC was also there as well. So it was good to just kind of collaborate a little bit more with the partners, and I'm very keen to continue doing that moving forward. But yeah, I mean, that's BAME property at the moment, and I think yeah, I think a few people acknowledge and kind of understand the surge in demand that BAME property has had in recent weeks, just with inquiries and so on. But I think it is just important to acknowledge that, you know, this shouldn't be a bandwagon. This should be something which is completely integrated within companies moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Priya. So we're going to finish off this section with Amos, Chairman of Black Professionals in Construction. Amos, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're well. My name is Amos. I'm an engineer. I've been in the construction industry now for 19 years. Do technical services management, and I've set up myself as a consultant now, and looking to move into full-time M&E contracting as a contractor. Started BPIC off last year, and we had a launch with JLL in September. BPIC basically is a network of professionals, so it's Black professionals in construction, so from entry level all the way up to senior and board level. We've had a good growth in terms of our network since we launched. I think it was just based because there was an empty space, which has been good for us at the moment. So, the first things we had to do was to gather people, do a focus group session of actually what they wanted, because I wasn't sure what they wanted, and actually figure out, what's out there in the market, and how people are feeling. So that was quite good. So we've structured ourselves now into having our network, with construction. Networking is actually quite a big thing. So our events, are not just, as much as they're promoting diversity and etc., they are also for people to network, which is quite a big thing in terms of our industry. You have to know people. So our events are really paramount in that regard. We're focusing on talent acquisition now. So a bit like Nikki, we're getting people in the industry. From a professional, like everyone was saying, mid-level going up, there's quite a lack of. So, we're literally working with partners, with companies that we work with from right from the start, apprentices, graduates, all the way up to board level. And board level is its own thing, really, with what, people are trying to address out there. We also have a supply chain of minority-owned firms. I think, I can't remember who said it, I think it was Charlotte. So minority-owned firms across the industry. Again, that's something that's picked up recently, which wasn't really our focus. But now we partnered up and working with Waltham Forest. We've got an event with them on Friday. I'll share with you guys if you want to tune in. So Waltham Forest, fact is Waltham Forest, they're 60% BAME. But then no one is building Waltham Forest that's from Waltham Forest, So that's a clear and obvious thing that people are looking to address now. So Waltham Forest, Lambeth, Southwark, and quite a few other, councils work with GLA, etc. So that's a supply chain. And then, our members range, just different type of members now from the councils I just mentioned, main contractors, your Vocus, etc., projects like HS2, did a bit of work with Tideway. And then, so these are all partnerships in consultants, your Bleeds, FNGs, etc. And that's basically the sort of people we're working with. So it's a membership that they commit themselves to, a bit like what Sue said. They commit themselves into the partner with us, and that's got various streams of working that we do with them. We've been London centric, but we're looking to spread across, a bit like what Priya said. Because of COVID, we couldn't really do some of our events which were meant to be outside London. So we're meant to have one in Manchester and another one in Birmingham. One with Morgan Sindel, and then the other one with I think it was FNG or Glees. I can't remember one of them. So we're looking to spread across London, because London is its own thing, but out there as well, people have issues to address. We're a team of 5. So myself, I chair the organization. We have people, looking at different streams. So we have one guy looking at the talent side, media, someone else looking at admin, internal admin, and then another guy who just goes out for drinks, meeting new people, which is good. So our whole thing, we just try and be, the whole thing we do, try and be positive. There's a lot of negativity to focus on, but there's a lot of positivity in our industry. There's a lot of good things. So we're trying to shine that light on people and say that there's good things, make it fun. Young people want to get excited, especially these days with the industry. So we need to show young people also having fun in the industry. We just want to show the positive light of construction. Whilst we're solving an issue at the same time, the industry has an issue of attracting people to start with anyway. Put diversity aside, it's just an industry where no one even advertises it, and everyone thinks everyone is just on the tools. You know, there's nothing wrong with being on the tools, but they don't know that it's a whole thing. You know, construction is its own big network. So what can NLA do? I think with organizations like yourself, it's a bit like, you know, with women in construction, they need male allies. You know, that's just how it works. You know, you can't just be going on about women in construction as women, because you start coming across as just naggy. You know, men, you know, sometimes you need someone else also speaking your language. You know, so that's why you need male advocates. You know, that you know, giving you a break in terms of, you know, the message, so people know that it's not just him having a moan. It's literally what it's supposed to be. So I think that's been a key, especially now, because you're seeing people coming out saying being neutral is not really going to count. We got to come out. You know, I'll speak to the MD of Balfour Beach, Beth West. She's a woman, and she was literally saying the same thing. You know, to say for her to be advocated, you know, being a woman, she had to get male advocates. So it's the same for us. So with NLA, if it can just be that platform of, you know, of actually saying, yeah, we were just quiet, but we're not okay with it either, you know, because people think you be quiet, they don't know where you stand. So I think NLA can do a good job in that. You've got big network. And thing is with contract, you know, people that are part of your network, NLA, will sort of, you know, they will listen to you, you know. Contractors or builders don't do anything. They don't need to do. They just won't do it. So they won't do diversity if they don't really need to do it. But it's not just diversity; it's everything. Builders won't do anything if they don't really have to do it. You know. So that's why I think you can help us, and they're good to me. Everyone else.
Great, thank you very much, Amos. That was great. I know, Charlotte, you've got to head off. We're just about to start the discussion. Is there anything you want to throw in before you head off?
No, just lovely to hear about what everybody's doing. Obviously, I know probably more of you than I don't know on the call. But Amos, I've sent you a private chat because I work for Waltham Forest. I didn't know they were doing that event with you. So I know who's probably organised it. And I was trying to get an architect that's from Waltham Forest that's very keen to do some construction stuff. So I'd like to put you in touch. But no, it was lovely to see you all, and Gabrielle will keep me updated. But if there's any actions for me specifically, just let me know. Happy to do anything.
Just quickly before you go, we're actually also doing a Waltham Forest event in 2 weeks, organising with Jonathan and I think Councillor Miller. So that's going to be launched quite soon, just so you know, we're doing one too. All right, thank you very much.
Your ones I always know about because Jonathan's good at telling us, but I think it's, yeah, I'm not always in the same meetings as employment at the moment. We sit quite close together in the office. You sort of miss everything at the moment, but yeah, no, cool. Thank you guys. See you later.
Okay, thank you everyone. So I've jotted down a few of the kind of common themes, and then what I want to do is just run you through a few of the ideas that we've had that hopefully can support some of the things that you're all doing. So the issue of unconscious bias has come up a few times both on this call and over the past couple of months. We heard about this kind of call for allyship amongst NLA members, which is something I think we can absolutely do. And then there was this issue around sort of careers. A number of you are working on, which I think is exactly the right place to be, the kind of helping young people from diverse backgrounds into professions in the built environment. But there was also this issue that came up around, I think Priya, you mentioned, okay, you do get at that kind of early stage, you do get a lot more diversity. How can we better support people at that stage to actually grow into the profession and become the future leaders? And that's when we're going to see the real change. So there's kind of the sort of pre-career, trying to get people excited and interested by those. And then there's the support that's needed kind of after that, which a number of you, I think, are working in. There was also the issue, I think, Nikki, you were mentioning this idea of, celebrating diversity. It's not a ticking a box and a quota, but actually how rich that makes teams. I think, is Nikki still here? I think she's gone. Oh no, you're there, you're on the left. It's because everyone's shifted around, that's what it is. So yeah, I think that's a really important point. So hopefully some of the suggestions that I'm gonna posit now, I think do actually cover some of those points quite well, but I'd be very happy to get your feedback and any other suggestions on ways we can work together. Just while we're going through the discussion, if you're not speaking, could you mute everyone is muted, but if you just make sure you're muted, because apparently we're getting some feedback from a few areas. Okay, I'll go through the list of things that I have. So at NLA, there's kind of a few kind of immediate actions that we have taken over the past couple of weeks. So we do have what's called our New London Charter, which is something that Peter Murray wrote 15 years ago. It's our 15-year anniversary in a couple of weeks. And that sort of all-encompassing charter for the future of London. It does speak about diversity. It's not explicit enough. So the first thing we're doing is we are updating that charter specifically around racial diversity as being key in creating a stronger and better future for London. So that language will definitely need updating and pushed right up the agenda of the new London Charter. We have already been organising D&I training for our own team. Some of you who know NLA well will know we are predominantly white. We're largely female. Actually, most of the people in the organisation are women. I think we've got like 10% or less men. But actually, BAME diversity and ethnic diversity is something that is not very strong across our organisation. It's something that we're looking at with a consultant. The third immediate step was to bring all of you together to get some sort of ideas and figure out how we can support the work you're doing. So in terms of our kind of ambitions and a longer term approach, I'm very aware that a lot of you are doing some sort of similar things, and we don't want to create anything that competes. We don't want to create a new brand around this. What we want to do is, as a few of you said, is kind of collaborate where we can, push out the work you guys are already doing, because there's some amazing work that you've already alluded to. But there has been this suggestion, and it could be one way we talk about allyship with our membership, is a sort of a diversity charter, and that could be working with everybody on this call, obviously with the GLA, with your diversity handbook, something relatively simple that we could push out across our membership. As I say, it's, as you know, it's a big network. There's very few people who aren't in that membership network, and get people to pledge to this charter around diversity. So the language of that, exactly what that would be, would need figuring out, but that's the first idea of something tangible that we thought we could support and work on together. The next one is something that a few of you have been involved in conversations with over a year ago, that again, lockdown unfortunately killed, which was in July. So literally in a few weeks, we were just about to get into the planning phase of a half-day conference tackling the issue of unconscious bias in the workplace, both in terms of work culture, but also in hiring practices. So the event was going to have a sort of punctuated by 3 different speakers at different stages in their careers, sharing their experiences of unconscious bias. We then have breakout sessions focusing on kind of critical actions that can be taken to improve diversity and inclusivity, both across the industry, but also within individual businesses. Because what we're finding from our members, in the same way, Priya, you've been getting inundated with people. We've had a lot of people come to us and saying, what do? We don't know what we're doing, and we're being called out because we posted a black square, which they were rightly called out, and it's why we were very, very careful around that, and there was a lot of debate and discussion. So actually giving tangible advice through initially some sort of half-day conference we thought would be good. Now, the third one is a little bit more nuanced, and it comes from my background prior to NLA. So I've been at NLA 5 years, but before that I was working in the heritage sector, which I wouldn't say has at least as bad a problem as the built environment sector, maybe even worse. And it was identified, back in, I think it was around 2010, the HLF did some research around sort of museum visitor figures and people who work in museums. And probably not surprisingly, it's like 98% white in the museum visitor figure, and the perception of what museums are about was very geared towards a white audience. And so they put some funding behind a project which very long, it was Heritage Lottery funded, Skills for the Future, and it was called Strengthening Our Common Life. I don't know if anyone's come across that, but it was a traineeship, so it kind of links into what a few of you are doing, Nikki and CJ and a few of you. And the purpose of that was to get young BAME kids, sort of 18 to 21, kind of pre-university, most of them, there's 1 or 2 who are a little bit older, into positions at museums or heritage sector organisations. And the traineeship, it wasn't as simple as a work placement. It was actually a traineeship that gave them an NVQ at the end. Well, it wasn't an NVQ, it was kind of an accreditation that they could take as an equivalent to a degree in heritage. And it was such a great programme. It was actually run by the Cultural Corporation. They're now called Culture Co or something, I think. But it was sort of monthly meetings between the trainees, monthly meetings between the mentors. There was loads of leadership training, and training expected to be given by the partner organizations. So just with that hat on, I was thinking there could be a place for working with a few people on this call to set something like this up, where we could have something that's accredited. Now, I know some of these things are happening, so I want to, as I say, add value. If you guys think you're already doing that, and we don't need to, then brilliant, and we can support what's going out there. But I think it's something that is realistic. I think our members would get on board with it. And as I say, I think if you start by getting young young people into the industry really excited by the career, and then you support them through that career, very soon we'll start to see leaders in our profession who do look more like the people on this call, and that's going to be when the real change happens. Because it's all very well, we've got people calling us saying, you know, put black people on your panels. Like, okay, we can do that, and that's absolutely something that should be done, the visibility, but that's not in itself is not going to change what we need to change in the next sort of 10 years. So those are sort of some of the ideas. And I guess if anyone, I think we'll do it if anyone wants to put their hand up like this, because otherwise I'm not sure how to do it. But if anyone's got any thoughts on any of those things. Maybe Nikki, if I could come to you just on the sort of traineeship idea.
Yeah, I think I know of some organisations already looking at some form of accreditation. There's a lot of conversation at the moment about apprenticeships. That's something we looked at originally. There's a conversation that I know the government's having at the moment around what's going to happen with those apprenticeship schemes, particularly post-COVID. And I think there's a big challenge. And what happens to those 16, 17, 18-year-olds and how we can support them and their mental health if there isn't a career. So I definitely think there's a really powerful role that perhaps we could start to play. I think there's also there's a challenge with the training that if they're not in a job or if they're not able to develop as they grow or they're not given the right support, how does that necessarily, how can they enact some of the things that we're training, and what's the relationship with mentorship programs that are currently existing? And I guess that maybe needs to sort of have a sort of partnership with I wanted to just flag on the unconscious bias thing. So my background before starting public practice was I was working on a people analytics wellbeing startup, and some of the HR industry is starting to flag that unconscious bias training actually isn't like perfect or the be all and end all. So I was just wanting to flag, I was a massive fan last year. I was like all for it. And now I've kind of started to change my mind a little bit about how you go about training people to become more aware about a lot of different biases. So you've got unconscious, but there's also a lot of other types of form of bias that we all hold. And maybe it's sort of talking about that as a sort of holistic thing rather than just focusing on one thing. So
might be a more, and you could actually cover unconscious bias in that. Okay, yeah, and as you say, actually this thinking is now kind of a year old. So, and I think when I probably last saw you, I think over a year ago in spring last year. So that's hasn't evolved much, but I think that's an interesting point. Priya, can I come to you if you had any thoughts on?
Hi, thank you. I echo what Nikki said on the unconscious bias training. I don't necessarily think it's the main thing that companies should be doing, because the kind of harsh and fast reality is that we all have unconscious bias. We all inherently have it, and you can do as much training as you want, but that's not necessarily going to kind of change your attitudes if you're still surrounded by the same people. And actually, what people find is probably more effective, or which companies need to start implementing, is it's more talking about culture. So I suppose everything that kind of underpins what we're talking about all comes down to company culture, because if you've got the right culture, which encourages diversity and inclusion, encourages people to be very much themselves and have open conversations and discussions, that naturally kind of removes those biases, because you're more likely to talk about yourself and your culture and your history and so on. So I think that's really what I think we should be encouraging companies to do, is kind of start that culture of positive change. So for example, a lot of companies at the moment are having discussions about Black Lives Matter, which I think is really important. And this is something which goes beyond the blackout image, because yes, you can do the image, but the only way you're really going to understand, or at least try to empathize with what's going on, is by having these conversations. So sometimes I think having these kind of roundtable discussions where you're giving Black people or any other ethnic minority people or other people from underrepresented backgrounds to kind of speak openly about their grievances or what they might be facing might be more effective. And I think something else which also works quite well is reverse mentoring. So something which quite a lot of young people look for when they enter the workplace, certainly over the last few years is reverse mentoring, where, you've got people who have just viewed the world a little bit differently to, people who've perhaps been in the industry for 15 to 20 years, often in the same job. And I think, certainly I've not been in the same job for for all of my working life. And I think that's quite common amongst, those who are graduating in the last few years, is that you do move around because there are so many reasons for this, but one of the things that we do look for is a really inclusive and open culture. So I think that goes back to, well, if you are having these conversations with those who've just entered the industry, you can get a better understanding of what they would like to see within the working environment. Why is it so important to them? How can they be the best version of themselves? So I think I would probably focus more on kind of culture change and reverse mentoring, as opposed to just unconscious bias. It's not to say that you shouldn't do it, but it should be in conjunction with other, training programs as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the bias piece could come out in the event, but certainly if we're thinking of some sort of charter or pledge across the industry, actually, yes, workplace culture is something that should come across. So it would be good to sort of share our initial thinking with you guys, because all of you have your own, methodology around this and your own language. And I think it would be good if there's something that we can do that everybody kind of gets behind, and that we can stick everybody's name on, and that it has some clout, so that people know that when they sign up, this is something that they should be doing. Ellie, can I come to you just on the potential? We sort of discussed with Pooja a while ago this idea of kind of where that diverse handbook piece was going, and we talked about, is there a bigger, more all-encompassing version of that we could support on research with, or is it simply that evolves into a charter? And I don't know if you've had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, what we've been doing recently, I mean, the handbook really focused on the architecture profession, but most of what is in there is really relevant across the sector. And the focus of our work has definitely now expanded to looking across the sector and where we can collaborate. So I think there is some work to be done around that. I'm really interested in what you're saying about a diversity charter. I think what we've found is that you really, really have to be clear about where you're trying to get to. And by clear, I mean kind of the world of like targets, and when you are trying to get there by, and be clear about how success will be measured, or how progress is going to be measured. I think it was really interesting hearing from Priya about the sudden kind of influx of lots of organisations asking for advice. We've found a similar thing with the Supporting Diversity Handbook, and what I notice is that people haven't read it when they come to us to ask for advice. And I think there's a real kind of tendency towards laziness. And it's just, people are busy. But I think if there is something that organisations can sign up to, there needs to be a really clear action that they are taking, or several actions that they are taking. I think this issue of unconscious bias is interesting, and the point around the company culture, something that's come out of lots of conversations. We're obviously looking at our workforce diversity in the GLA, and I think the key thing that we want to address is the ethnicity pay gap within the organisation. It's really hard to create an inclusive culture when you don't have anyone in senior leadership who is from a BAME background. There are very few women, etc. And getting that diverse senior leadership really has a knock-on effect on the rest of the organisation. But I guess history has proven that that's not going to happen unless we take positive action. And I know that some people are resistant to positive action, but we see it as a really necessary step. So I think it's worth us having a follow-up, because there are obviously lots of things that the Supporting Diversity Handbook covers. It would be great if it could be disseminated more widely, and it might be useful for people in this group who are being asked lots of questions, just to kind of point people in the direction of the handbook, because it does have a lot of useful advice.
Something that is relevant. One thing I wanted to say is, since lockdown started, we've seen kind of and I know a lot of other people's social channels and now newsletters, kind of engagement and click-throughs opens go through the roof. So actually, New London Weekly, which we did from the first week of lockdown, we're getting sort of 4 or 5 times the sort of opens and click-throughs, and people are really engaging with that content. So I think everybody on the call has said something or shared something that we put in there to support the things that we're doing. And certainly that's a really good one to, again, just highlight and bring up.
Benjamin, sorry, can I just quickly cut in?
Yeah.
It was just following on from Nikki's point, actually. So it was just a conversation about attracting people from a younger age or in a younger level. So I think what I've found has been quite important in some of the successes we've experienced on this platform is that it shouldn't just necessarily be about trying to get people qualified and chartered into the industry or defined into a particular role or position. I think what we need to be more mindful of is actually trying to get the conversation started. So, you know, we've seen in recent times that because of systemic issues, people aren't able to get into the sector because of their name, because of their appearance, because of their, you know, finances. There's all sorts of holistic reasons why people have been disadvantaged, Black people especially. So I think what we've got now to going forward is change the conversation and actually get people talking about what it is about the built environment that they're passionate about. It shouldn't just be go down the route, become a qualified surveyor, become a qualified architect. Here you go to this university. Let's have a conversation. What we're trying to do as a platform is we're trying to get content that's relatable and accessible for younger people. So I think in terms of, I don't believe in tokenism. I don't believe in putting people in a position of seniority because of their race. I don't believe in that whatsoever. I think for it to be sustainable and long lasting, we need to start at the grassroots level. And we need to hold people's hands from the beginning and, as you rightly say, sort of manage them through to the point where they can thrive in senior positions. And that, as I said, that's not going to come from just defined roles within the sector. It's got to be from conversations and the content that we're producing. So I just wanted to get it out before we went to...
I agree with that, and I think there's some interesting things we could do on that. I'd love to pick up a conversation with you around how we might be able to support some of the things you're doing. Once I'm done with these notes, obviously I'll send around some actions and everything. I wanted to come to you, Bolo, and see if you'd had any thoughts. I know you put a message in around mentorship.
Yes, apologies. So I've just put a note in there to just tease the conversation, really. And, you know, I've heard lots of great things. And, you know, I'm doing so much and have done a lot, but it really does come down to what CJ's talking about, people, and particularly young people. And you're right, CJ, you know, getting qualified, isn't it? Staying is the trick, retention. That's the sector's biggest problem across the piece, I find. So, and we've just been approached actually late last year, more recently, senior level discussions. This year we partnered with UCM and University of Nottingham coming behind them because they recognize that actually their students are struggling even before they leave. So the students are recognizing, wow, what are we getting into and where is our representation at senior level? So the mentorship has just blown up, literally. And I'm going to put a link into something I wrote for the RICS last week. Pretty historic, but I also got the profession to recognize that they needed to make a statement on the Black issue, not the BAME issue. And someone's made a point about differentiating between the two, and the two are clearly different, but they're all related. So the mentorship piece for me is critical. It's been the elephant in the room for many years. I think it goes both ways in terms of upstream and downstream, but it's growing for us because young people, mid-careers, career changers do need that information and guidance. They need that lived experience. You know, what is it like? How do we connect, etc. So, you know, and that's why I'm defaulting to the diversity charter. To me, that is a strategic quick win that can yield a number of different things almost at the same time. So I'm very excited about that in particular. There's lots of great ideas. You know, everyone's doing great work. I'm going to be working very closely with Amos and Sue strategically, because I've done a lot of work over 20 years that actually I now want to be more strategic about working with the two of them. But again, it's about allowing people to exist and bring their whole self. And it's still, you know, the conversation that CJ mentioned, the conversation can be quite offensive. you know, depending on which side of the table you're sitting on. And for those that are fearful of saying the wrong thing, I'm saying, let's have the conversation and work out where the middle ground is, if there is a middle ground. But don't do nothing. Don't say nothing. That's just not good enough. That's no excuse now. So the conversation for me is everything. I'm going to post a link about the very same issue that I wrote on behalf of RICS 2 weeks ago. And, you know, I'm very, very excited about the charter. The charter to me just makes sense. It's the glue that can bring us all together strategically. It gives us a voice. It gives us a collective insight into what everyone is doing. So, and that's what I'm a fan of. I don't want everyone to be doing the same thing in isolation, all these silos. We've got to get away from the silo thinking. We've got to think, how can we have maximum impact in the shortest space of time? And time is not on our side. If the COVID lockdown has taught you anything, it's that we don't control anything. We are just in the process. So while we're in the process, let's work smarter and get things done in a meaningful way. And it's not about us, it's not about me. In fact, everyone on this call is the wrong type of person. I don't really want to talk to you guys. I want to talk to those that don't get it. And there are plenty of people that just don't get it. That's who we need to engage with. And I think the charter could be a really good, in fact, the charter plus the handbook, to your point, Ellie, could be a really good ground zero, as I call it now. Yeah, does that make sense?
Totally, thank you, Paula. It was a really good points, and I think something we definitely need to focus on. I want to just pick up on with David, Chris, and Tom on the sort of LGBT point, because something I spoke to Priya about last week is we obviously don't. There's sort of this reluctance sometimes sort of group all diversity together. Obviously, they're completely different lived experiences, but as Priya pointed out, well, actually, you know, one person can have 3 or 4 of those identities and different experiences. So I think it's a really good place to start, where we actually all talk about these issues in one place. But I think individually, there are certainly different outputs and things that we can work on. I think there's probably certainly an event around the venues piece and the pride piece. So I'd love to pick up that conversation separately, and pride and property, and any ways that we can support that, or we can put a news piece out on NLW, whatever that looks like. And I think what I'll be doing, it'll probably come early next week, because as I'm sure all of your diaries are really full as well, but I want to spend a day or two just thinking about everything that we've spoken about today, and I want to send across some notes and some actions that we'll be doing our end. But I think the really important thing that's come out of this is just to kind of keep in touch, and I think we should do this again. I'm not talking like every week. I'm talking, you know, in a couple of months, maybe in 2 months, when we've sort of settled on what the plan is, and be realistic about what we can achieve. But what has been really, really clear is everybody's working really hard, doing lots of incredible things, but we don't want to duplicate. As Bola suggested, we want to have the maximum impact. I think the only way we can do that is by knowing what everybody's doing and kind of supporting that work across the piece. So we're very excited about kind of helping that communication. Are there, just before we wrap up, are there any other final comments that anyone wants to make? Yeah. Oh, a few. Let's go to David. David, did you have your hand up, or was it Ellie? David, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry, just to echo really what you were saying and what Bola was saying about diversity being a very broad church. Whenever I have been involved in networks, they've never entirely worked, because everyone's very slightly fighting their own corner. And I think it'd be great as part of your piece of work, unless it's in the diversity handbook I'm looking forward to reading, that there is a common core that we all share, and it's very much like a Venn diagram of diversity groups. And if we can identify what that core that kind of unites us, I very much look forward to working with everyone to achieve that. Slightly on the side as well, I've been talking to Land Aid about potentially getting a lot of the network groups together to do a network against youth homelessness, which very often has a minority angle to it. Just as a pool of people, we are incredibly well connected and powerful, and I'd really like to do something to help Land Aid out if other people would be willing to support that.
Yeah, we did. We had an idea some time ago, again ruined by lockdown, about doing an event potentially at Broadgate, looking at LGBT youth homeless. I think it's 1 in 4, that number. But as you say, across the diverse piece, I mean, I don't know what the stat is, but disproportionately affects people from diverse backgrounds for sure. One final comment, Tom. Go on, Tom.
Very quickly, we've actually drafted a LGBT charter that we were going to launch this year, so we definitely should link up and talk about that
Excellent, definitely. Do share that and we can amplify that. And I think, yeah, individually, I think there's no problem with having sort of different charters for different bits of it, but it would be good, as we said, working with, you know, the GLA, obviously as the public body, we at NLA sit kind of that line between public and private, having a kind of cross-industry, more general charter for what we think about diversity. So I'll get working on that and put some actions together. Thank you all so much for coming. It was such a productive session, really, really interesting. You're all doing amazing things. Do stay in touch. As I said, if you've got anything you want to share or any ideas for things you want us to push out, sorry, I know, Sarah, we didn't get to you and a couple of you in the discussion, but if there's anything you want us to push out through NLW or New London Quarterly even, which is the magazine, let us know and we'll get that done. Thank you all for coming and have a great day. Speak to you soon.
Cheers, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone, that's great.